My dear listeners, Whitechapel, London, autumn of 1888. The streets are choked with fog and coal smoke. The gas lamps flicker. Somewhere in the gloom, a figure walks unnoticed in the press of the city's poorest district. He is calm. He is patient. He has a blade, and he will use it with a surgeon's precision. Before the year is out, he will kill at least 5 women, perhaps more. And in the process, he will carve his way into history. The newspapers will give him a name. The police will chase shadows, and the world will never forget him. His name? Jack the Ripper. I know this is probably an overstated topic, an overcovered topic, but this is a topic that I myself, like many of you, have been interested in for a very, very long time. For me, since I was a young child. So tonight, we're not just telling his story, we're walking through the investigation itself. Murder by murder, letter by letter, suspect by suspect, and together we will sift through the fog, the fear, and the fact to ask the question that has haunted true crime for over 135 years. Who was Jack the Ripper? To understand the Ripper, we must first understand his hunting ground. By the late 19th century, London was the largest city in the world. Over 5 million souls, all crowded together in a mix of grandeur and desperation. While the West End glittered with wealth, the East End, and Whitechapel in particular, was a place where survival was a daily battle. Whitechapel in 1888 was a labyrinth of narrow alleys, gaslit courts, and rotting tenements. An estimated 80,000 people lived in the area, barely over 1 square mile. Many slept 6 to a bed in lodging houses. Others simply walked the streets all night to avoid the workhouse. The district was also an entry point for immigrants. Irish fleeing famine, Jews escaping pogroms in Eastern Europe. And this influx of cultures bred both diversity and tension. Work was scarce, wages were low, and resentment was at an all-time high. And then there was the sex trade. In a neighborhood where starvation was common, prostitution wasn't a vice. It was often the only means of survival. The Metropolitan Police estimated at least 1,200 prostitutes in Whitechapel, most of them middle-aged, impoverished, and alcohol dependent. They were easy prey, alone, desperate, and forced to work the streets at night. Violence was nothing new here. Muggings, beatings, stabbings, all common occurrences. But in late summer of 1888, something began that was different. Something methodical, something monstrous. Friday, August 31st, 1888, Bucks Row. At about 3:40 a.m., Constable John Neal was on his beat in Bucks Row, a dimly lit street lined with warehouses and cottages. His lantern swept the ground and caught the shape of a woman lying on her back. Mary Ann Polly Nichols was 43 years old, a mother of 5, separated from her husband, and living in common lodging house. That night, she had been turned away from her bed at Wilmot's lodging house because she couldn't pay the 4 pence fee. She told friends she would soon earn the money and walked off into the darkness. When Neil found her, Polly's throat had been cut twice, from left to right. Her abdomen bore deep, jagged slashes. Her hands were cold, and chillingly, her eyes were still open. There was a little blood on the cobbles, suggesting that she had been killed where she lay, and that her killer had worked quickly. And so the investigation begins. Inspector Frederick Aberline, a seasoned detective with years in Whitechapel, was brought in from Scotland Yard. Aberline ordered that officers patrol in pairs at night and interviewed lodging house keepers, stable workers, and anyone who might have seen Polly in her final hour. A post-mortem by Dr. Rhys Llewellyn, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, concluded the killer had a, quote, certain degree of anatomical knowledge, unquote. The precision of the throat cuts and the deliberate abdominal wounds were unlike the random violence common in Whitechapel. At this stage, the police didn't know it yet, but they had just found the first canonical victim of Jack the Ripper. Saturday, September 8th, 1888. Hanbury Street. At 6 a.m., John Davis, a resident of 29 Hanbury Street, stepped into the backyard and froze. On the cold flagstones lay the body of Annie Chapman. Annie was 47, separated from her husband, and living hand to mouth. She had been in poor health for months, suffering from tuberculosis and alcoholism. Like Polly, she had spent the night trying to get enough money for lodging. The scene was gruesome. Annie's throat had been cut deeply, her abdomen opened, and her uterus removed with precision. Personal items, a piece of muslin, a comb, and 2 brass rings were laid out neatly near her feet. Witness accounts: Elizabeth Long, on her way to Spitalfields Market around 5:30 a.m., claimed she saw Annie talking to a man just outside 29 Hanbury Street. He was about 40, wore a dark coat and a deerstalker-style hat, and spoke with a foreign accent. Her testimony would give investigators their first real description. In the police response, Inspector Aberline believed this killing was linked to Polly Nichols. The speed and precision of the organ removal led to him to consider that the killer might have medical training. Scotland Yard ordered a sweep of local hospitals, slaughterhouses, and medical schools. Public fear began to grow. Newspapers began printing lurid accounts of the, quote, the fiend of Whitechapel, end quote. The working women of the East End now had a new rule: never walk the streets alone at night. On September 25th, 1888, the Central News Agency received a letter written in red ink. The handwriting was neat. The tone was mocking. It read, "Dear Boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled." Gosh, that was difficult to read. Horrible English. The writer promised more killings, describing cutting off ears, and signed off, "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. And the name stuck. The newspapers printed it, and overnight, Jack the Ripper became a household term. Many investigators suspected the letter was a hoax, possibly written by a journalist looking to sell papers, but its timing was a bit ominous. 2 days later, the killer struck again. Not once, but twice in one night. At around 1 a.m. on Sunday, September 30th, 1888, in the early morning, the East End awoke to the most terrifying development yet. 2 murders in under an hour. Louis Deemschutz, steward of the International Working Men's Educational Club, talk about a mouthful, turned his pony and cart into Dutfield's yard off Burner Street. The pony sheathed, and in the light of his whip's match flare, he saw a woman lying on her side. This was Elizabeth Stride. She's 45, was Swedish born, and had been living in Whitechapel for over 2 decades. Known as Long Liz, she worked as a cleaner and a prostitute. Her throat had been slashed deeply, but unusually, there were no abdominal mutilations. Police believed the killer had been interrupted, possibly by Deemschutz himself. Witnesses placed Stride with a man earlier in the night, some describing him as respectable looking, others as rough. And the varying accounts just muddied the investigation. Barely 45 minutes later, in the jurisdiction of the City of London Police, another woman was found. At 1:45 a.m., Constable Edward Watkins discovered Catherine Eddowes, 46, lying in a quarter of Mitre Square. This time, the Ripper's full signature was present. We're talking throat cut, abdomen opened, left kidney removed, and her face slashed with deliberate cuts to her nose, cheeks, and eyelids. Eddowes had been released from Bishopsgate Police Station just after 1 a.m. for public drunkenness. Her final walk through the misty streets had taken her directly into the Ripper's path. On the route between Mitre Square and Whitechapel, police found a blood-stained piece of Eddowes' apron in a doorway on Golston Street. Above it, scrawled in chalk, was the message, quote, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing," end quote. The meaning remains debated. An anti-Semitic slur, Masonic reference, or something else entirely. Commissioner Charles Warren, fearing riots against the Jewish community, ordered it erased before daylight, destroying a potentially vital clue. The very next day, however, the Central News Agency received a postcard. It read, quote, "I was not codding, dear old boss, when I gave you the tip. You'll hear about Saucy Jacky's work tomorrow. Double event this time," end quote. It referenced both murders, and the phrase double event appeared in print for the first time. Again, authenticity was disputed, but the details matched what only the killer or the police could have known. At this stage, public panic reached a fever pitch. The police were under siege from reporters, tipsters, and vigilante committees. And Scotland Yard was drowning in false leads, and Jack was still out there. In mid-October of 1888, Mr. George Lusk, head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, received a small box in the post. Inside, a letter written in a coarse, almost illiterate scrawl, and half of a preserved human kidney. And the letter read, quote, "From hell. Mr. Lusk, sir, I send you half the kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you. The other piece I fried and ate it. It was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out if only you wait a while longer." End quote. Holy crap. That was difficult to read. So many spelling errors here. Like, almost seems a little lack of intelligence. Anyway. The kidney was examined by Dr. Thomas Openshaw of the London Hospital, who confirmed it was human and from the left side. How? I don't know. I'm not a surgeon. We'll just take his word for it. The same organ removed from Catherine Eddowes. However, he could not determine if it belonged to her, because obviously they didn't have things like DNA yet. I mean, if they still have that, I guess they could potentially do a DNA test. I don't know. Anyway, unlike the earlier Dear Boss and Saucy Jacky messages, this one's spelling and tone were radically different. Many considered it more authentic, the crude language a better fit for the kind of man who prowled Whitechapel's alleys with a blade. And we come to the last murder on Friday, November 9th of 1888 in Miller's Court. Mary Jane Kelly was 25 years old, far younger than the other canonical victims and the youngest out of all of them. She was Irish-born, strikingly attractive, and fluent in both English and Welsh. She had lived in Whitechapel for a few years, working as a prostitute and occasionally singing in pubs. Come on, let's English today, please, Calix. She rented a small single room at 13 Miller's Court off Dorset Street, a cul-de-sac known as one of the worst in London. She rented a small single room at 13 Miller's Court, and I'm repeating myself, excuse me. That morning, her landlord's assistant, Thomas Bauer, came to collect overdue rent. Through the grimy window, he saw what looked like a pile of meat on the bed. He ran and reported it, and when the police arrived, they forced the door open. What they found was unlike anything they had ever seen. Kelly's body was almost unrecognizable. Her throat was cut to the spine. Her abdomen was opened and emptied, organs placed about the room, and flesh had been flayed from her thighs and hung out on a picture frame. Her face was obliterated by dozens of knife cuts. That's just disgusting to imagine, and I've seen the pictures. For anybody who hasn't seen it, I do not recommend. Absolutely do not recommend. Do yourself the favor. Why so brutal? Investigators believed the privacy of an indoor location gave the Ripper more time than ever before. This was rage, ritual, and indulgence combined. After Kelly's death, the killings just mysteriously stopped. At least the ones fitting Jack's pattern. Police speculated he might have died, been imprisoned for another crime, or simply just moved away. By year's end, Scotland Yard had interviewed over 2,000 people, investigated 300, and detained 80. Yet, no one was charged. But the case wasn't cold, at least not yet. The press kept the story alive, and police quietly built a list of prime suspects. By the winter of 1888, the murders had stopped, but the investigation hadn't. Scotland Yard and the City of London Police each had their own shortlists, and over the decades, researchers have added their own candidates to the gallery of potential rippers. 7 names stand out. Men whose lives, habits, and proximity to the killings kept them under suspicion then, and in some cases, keep their ghosts on the list to this very day. So we're going to go ahead and go over those 7 right now. The first one, Montague John Druitt, a barrister and part-time school teacher from a respectable family in Dorset. Montague was 31 in 1888, well-educated, athletic, and from an upper middle-class background. He didn't fit the stereotypical image of a Whitechapel killer. But in early December, Druitt disappeared. His body was later found floating in the Thames on 31st of December. A suicide note to his brother spoke of becoming like mother, a reference to his mother's mental illness. The key? Druitt's dismissal from his teaching job came shortly after the last canonical murder. Chief Constable Sir Melville McNaughton later named him as a strong suspect, writing that he was sexually insane, and his suicide coincided with the end of the murders. Critics argue there's no evidence Druitt was ever in Whitechapel during the killings, and that his suicide may have had nothing to do with them. Still, the timing was suspicious and enough to keep his name alive. The next one is Aaron Kosminski, a name that I'm sure everybody has heard plenty of. A Polish Jewish immigrant, Aaron Kosminski worked as a barber in Whitechapel. By 1888, he was in his early 20s, living with relatives near the murder sites. Kosminski suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. He was known to carry a knife, refuse to wash, and sometimes threatened women. In 1891, he was committed to Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum, where he lived until his death in 1919. A witness at an identification parade allegedly confirmed him as the killer, but refused to testify in court, possibly for fear of anti-Semitic backlash, or possibly because the individual was a Jew himself. In 2014, researchers claimed mitochondrial DNA from a shawl linked to Catherine Eddowes matched Kosminski's maternal line. Many experts dismissed this as flawed due to contamination and poor handling of evidence. Also, the inability to prove that it was Eddowes' shawl, and on top of that, just 130-something years, I really doubt there's going to be any kind of DNA evidence still on a piece of fabric. But I'm not an expert. It's just my opinion. Next one, his name is Michael Ostrog. He was Russian-born. Ostrog was a con man, thief, and compulsive liar who often posed as a doctor. He was intelligent, spoke multiple languages, and, most importantly for investigators, had a history of violence. Ostrog appeared in McNaughton's list of suspects, but later research showed he may have been imprisoned in France during the Ripper murders. His inclusion might have been based more on his criminal background and suspicious character than any real given evidence. Fourth one, Mr. George Chapman. Born in Poland, Chapman trained as a barber surgeon before emigrating to London in 1887. By 1888, he was living in Whitechapel, within walking distance of several of the murder sites. In the years after the Ripper killings, Chapman married and poisoned 3 successive wives, which honestly does not make sense. I mean, serial killers are not known to really change up their MO so drastically. Like, you don't go from brutally and extremely violently murdering somebody with, precision cuts and stabbings and stuff like that to just poisoning them. He was caught, however, convicted, and hanged in 1903. Chapman's medical skills, violent misogyny, and presence in the area during the murders may make him a plausible suspect. But critics argue his later use of poison, yep, exactly what I just said, suggests a different kind of killer. But others believe he may have changed methods to avoid suspicion. See, I don't think that. I don't really think this one's too credible. I mean, serial killers don't just change up their MO, like, at the snap of a finger. It does not happen. I'm sorry. I don't know. Agree to disagree with me if you want. No, I don't believe it. The fifth one is Thomas Cutbush, a medical student and the nephew of Senior Metropolitan Police Superintendent Cutbush, was committed to an asylum in 1891 after stabbing 2 women in the buttocks with a knife. So, basically, he stabbed 2 women in the ass. The Sun newspaper accused him of being the Ripper in 1894, suggesting the police covered it up to avoid scandal. Scotland Yard officially denied it, but the conspiracy theories persisted and ran wild. His medical knowledge and history of knife attacks kept him and still keep him in the suspect pool. The next one is Francis Tumblety. He was an American quack doctor selling herbal remedies. Tumblety traveled extensively and was in London during the murders, and he openly expressed a hatred of women, especially prostitutes, and allegedly kept a collection of preserved uteruses in jars. That is pretty sick and suspect. He was arrested for gross indecency with men during the Ripper scare. Oh my goodness. Released on bail and fled to the U.S. Scotland Yard kept a file on him for years. His anatomy interest and misogyny make him compelling, though he was older and taller than most of the witness descriptions. But yeah, like, witness statements, witness descriptions, though, like, they're not that reliable. Let's be honest. Like, I know that's really all they had to go off of back in 1888, but I mean, we're a lot smarter now, and yeah, we know that witness statements can be flawed. And the last one, Charles Lechmere, aka Charles Cross. He was a carman for Pickford's. Lechmere claimed to have discovered Polly Nichols' body on his way to work, but modern researchers point out inconsistencies in his testimony His route to work placed him near multiple murder sites at relevant times, and his stop at the body could have been a ruse to explain being caught at the scene. So basically, he was standing over the body when another man came walking up. And what I find interesting about this one, I know I didn't put it in the script here, but it just based off of memory. When the two men, were looking at her, they didn't notice any blood, and the one man, the I can't remember his name, but he had offered or suggested to lean her up against the wall or the fence or whatever was right there, and Charles just really quickly and quite suddenly is like, no, I will not touch her. So it's a little suspicious. Maybe he did know something, because when the Bobby came by later, he said the first thing he noticed was the pool of blood. But neither Charles or this other individual saw the blood. So maybe she had literally just been murdered. I don't know. There's a great documentary on it on YouTube, and I think it's still on Netflix. You should watch it. They did a whole hour documentary about this guy as a suspect. Anyway, police in 1888 didn't consider him as a suspect, but modern geographic profiling puts him squarely in the killer's comfort zone. Yeah, and I think, what was it, during the double events, he was outside of his normal route to. So, like, all three of the five murders all line up with one of the two routes he could have possibly taken to work. Now, there are the other two murders. The double event happened, obviously, in the city of London itself. It just so happens that Leechmere's mother lived in that area. And it also so happens that he was off for work that day. So take that as you will. Now, here's where we get into some of the interesting stuff. So I did a little bit of research, and I found a modern profiling of Jack the Ripper. So in 1888, the term serial killer didn't exist. Police knew patterns could connect crimes, but they lacked the behavioral science we take for granted today. Now, if we apply modern profiling techniques to Jack the Ripper, we can sketch a more complete picture of the man behind the knife. Now, for the demographics and background, the modern profilers came up with a male aged 25 to 40 at the time of the murders, local to Whitechapel, which I will give credit to the investigators at the time. They figured it was probably a local, or at least intimately familiar with its geography. The speed of his escapes suggests he could vanish into the warren of alleys without hesitation, likely single or in a living situation where absences at night wouldn't be noticed. His occupations possibly could have been butcher or slaughterman, explaining the quick, confident abdominal work. Medical student or unlicensed surgeon, giving him enough anatomical knowledge to target specific organs. Or a dock or warehouse worker, jobs with irregular hours and access to heavy clothing for concealment. But nothing really to suggest anatomical knowledge with that one. I don't agree with that one, but this is what the profilers have said. And then behavioral patterns. Jack's kills show an organized offender. He selected secluded spots with minimal lighting, approached from behind, cutting the throat to silence his victims instantly. He escalated mutilations over time, suggesting growing confidence and deeper psychological satisfaction from the act. Now, his psychological profile they determined he would be a sexual sadist, deriving pleasure not from intercourse, but from domination, mutilation, and control over the victim's body. Possibly a necrophile, the post-mortem nature of the mutilations suggests his focus was on the corpse. And then narcissistic traits were present, taunting the police through letters, manipulating the press to spread his name. Cooling off periods, the gaps between murders from a week to over a month point to an offender who killed when the urge became overwhelming and not purely by opportunity. This pattern matches later killers like BTK and Ted Bundy. The signature versus modus operandi, the MO, rapid throat cutting, abdominal mutilation, organ removal. The signature, deliberate posing of bodies, escalating facial mutilations, organ trophy taking, acts of severing his psychological needs rather than practical ones. They also, in the profiling, they did some modern day parallels, like the Zodiac Killer, who sent letters to the press and coded taunts. BTK, with long pauses between the killings, manipulation of police via the media. And Ted Bundy, targeted vulnerable women, operated in familiar territory, and escalated in brutality. Now, if Jack lived today, his behavioral patterns would put him at the top of the FBI's most wanted list within weeks. But in 1888, his cunning and the city's chaos let him walk away unseen. Now, there are a couple theories here I want to go over, as well as some counter theories. Over the decades, theories about the Ripper's identity have multiplied. There's the single killer theory. The canonical 5 victims were all his work with identical signature and escalating violence. Then there's the multiple killer theory, where some believe the double event or even Mary Jane Kelly were the work of copycats. And then conspiracy theories, like the royal family involvement, Masonic cover-ups, and police suppression have all been floated, though most lack solid evidence. And then escape or death. The murder stopped because the killer died, was arrested for another crime, or emigrated. Each theory has its advocates and detractors, and none can be proven beyond reasonable doubt. Whitechapel sleeps uneasily. The gas lamps burn low. Their lights struggle against the heavy London fog. Somewhere down a narrow, glistening alley, the echo of boots fade into silence. The Ripper is gone, but his shadow never left. And for over 135 years, his name has haunted books, films like From Hell, whispered conversations. He has no grave, no trial, no confession. Only the scraps of witness testimony, the cruel photographs, the yellowing police reports, and the certainty that for a short, terrible season, he stalked these streets and made them his hunting ground. He killed in one of the most densely populated cities in the world and vanished each time without a trace. He played the press like an instrument, turning his murders into a public spectacle. And he left us with a riddle. Was he a butcher? A doctor? A foreigner hiding in plain sight? Or someone so ordinary that no one has ever thought to look twice? We will never know for certain, and perhaps That's why he still grips the imagination. Jack the Ripper isn't just a man. He's an idea, a reminder that evil doesn't always wear horns or fangs. Sometimes it walks beside you, brushes past you on the street, tips its hat, and keeps on walking. The streets of Whitechapel have changed since 1888. The rookeries have been torn down, the gas lamps replaced by neon. But on quiet, misty nights, when the pubs have emptied and the alleys fall still, it's easy to imagine a shadow slipping past. A flicker of movement in the fog, and the faint glint of steel. So as we leave these cobblestone streets, remember, the Ripper was never caught, his true face never unmasked, and somewhere in the folds of history, he still waits. I'm Calix Rivers, and this was From the Ashtray.